The cold welcome. I still remember the smell of cinnamon and pine needles lingering in the air that cold December evening. Christmas at my stepmother Victoria's house was always pitched to the world as a magazine cover holiday. The massive crystal chandelier in the dining room cast a warm, glittering glow over a table set for 14 people. Silverware shone, fine porcelain plates gleamed, and the finest silk napkins were folded meticulously into perfect little holiday shapes. Everyone in town thought Victoria was a saint. She was the woman who organized charity galas, smiled sweetly for the local news, and always wore cashmere sweaters while talking about the importance of family values. But behind closed doors, behind that manicured lawn and grand double-door entrance, Victoria was a master of a very quiet, very polite kind of cruelty. I stood in the entryway, shivering slightly, holding a modest boxed pie I had spent 3 hours baking. I was 28 years old, but the moment I stepped over that threshold, I felt like the helpless 14-year-old girl my father had dragged into this house after my mother passed away. Victoria didn't greet me with a hug. She didn't offer to take my coat. Instead, she stood at the top of the foyer stairs, her eyes slowly sweeping down from my boots to my simple wool coat, letting out a soft, pitying sigh. "Oh, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You actually made it. And look at you, still wearing that same coat from 3 winters ago. Well, wipe your feet thoroughly. I just had the Italian marble polished, and I would hate for your cheap boots to scuff it." Her daughter, my stepsister Chloe, emerged from the living room wearing a designer silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Chloe glanced at the box in my hands and wrinkled her nose. "What is that smell? Clara, please tell me you didn't bring some grocery store pastry into Mom's house. Julian's parents are coming tonight, remember. They expect real class." Julian was Chloe's wealthy fiancé. For months, Victoria had been bragging about how Chloe's marriage to Julian's family would cement their place in the town's highest social circles. And because of that, I was an eyesore. I was the reminder of a past Victoria wanted to erase, the quiet, hardworking stepdaughter who didn't fit into her high society dreams. My father was nowhere to be seen. He had passed away 2 years ago, leaving Victoria in control of the family estate, or so she thought. After his death, Victoria and Chloe made it their personal mission to ensure I felt completely stripped of my place in this family. They kept his money, sold off my mother's old jewelry, and slowly cut me out of every family event. "Just put that dreadful pie on the kitchen counter, Clara," Victoria commanded, walking past me without looking into my eyes. "And don't sit in the living room yet. The guests are arriving, and I need you to make yourself useful." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. For years, I had taken their insults in silence. I had learned to nod, step back, and let them believe they had total control over my life. Victoria thought I was broken. She thought I was just a sad, desperate girl clinging to the edges of a family that didn't want her. She had no idea that tonight was going to be very different. I walked into the kitchen, set the pie down, and took a deep breath. Underneath my coat, tucked inside the inner pocket of my bag, was a thick manila envelope. Inside that envelope were documents stamped by the city's top real estate attorneys. Victoria thought she owned this house. She thought she was welcoming me into her grand mansion out of the pity of her heart. But as I stood alone in that kitchen, listening to the fake laughter ring out from the living room, I smiled to myself. They thought tonight was going to be my final humiliation. They had no idea they were walking straight into mine. Years of poison. To understand how we ended up at that table, you have to understand the slow, painful poison that Victoria had fed into my life for over a decade. When my dad married Victoria, I was just a teenager grieving my mother. My dad was a brilliant man, a soft-spoken architect who loved restoring old historic properties, but he was blind when it came to love. Victoria swept into his life like a hurricane, presenting herself as a loving mother who wanted nothing more than to bring warmth back into our lives. At first, the cruelty was tiny. It was a subtle remark about my hair not being neat enough. It was forgetting to buy me a matching dress for the family photo shoot. It was moving my mother's handmade quilt into the basement because it didn't match the modern aesthetic of the renovated home. Then came Chloe. Chloe was 2 years younger than me, but Victoria raised her like a princess who deserved the world, while treating me like an unpaid servant. If Chloe failed a test, it was because the teacher was unfair. If I scored top marks, Victoria would say, "Well, book smarts won't get a woman very far without grace and charm, Clara." When my dad fell ill 3 years ago, Victoria completely took over his affairs. She restricted who could see him, managed his medications, and kept me at arm's length. Near the end, when my dad could barely speak, he would hold my hand and whisper, "I'm sorry, Clara. I made sure you're taken care of. Don't worry. Look under the house." At the time, I thought he was confused, speaking in riddles because of his heavy medication. When he passed away, Victoria immediately produced a copy of a will that left the house, the family bank accounts, and all assets entirely to her, with a minor stipend set aside for Chloe's trust fund. I was left with nothing, not even my mother's wedding ring. When I asked Victoria about my dad's personal papers, she stood in the grand hallway of this very house, wrapped her silk scarf tighter around her neck, and looked down her nose at me. "Clara, darling, your father was deep in debt when he died," she lied seamlessly. "I worked miracles just to keep a roof over our heads. Be grateful I'm not asking you to help pay off his medical bills. You need to pack your things and find a small apartment. It's time for you to grow up and stop expecting handouts." I moved out that very week. I took a job at a property management firm, working 60 hours a week in a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. I lived on instant noodles, saved every single penny, and said nothing. For 2 full years, Victoria and Chloe treated me like a charity case. Every few months, Victoria would invite me over just to show me off to her friends as her poor, tragic stepdaughter, whom she graciously allowed into her home. She would hand me old, faded clothes Chloe no longer wanted. She would ask me to help serve drinks at her dinner parties. Why did I go? Why did I keep going back to a place that caused me so much pain? Because 6 months ago, I finally understood what my father meant when he whispered, "Look under the house." It wasn't a metaphor, it was a clue. And once I unlocked what my father had actually built, everything changed. Victoria thought she had pulled off the ultimate trick by taking my father's life work. She didn't realize that my dad knew exactly who she was long before he passed away, and he had laid a trap that was decades in the making. The secret table. 6 months before that fateful Christmas dinner, I was working late at the property management office when a client called about an old commercial trust deed tied to a series of historic residential properties in our city. The name on the original deed wasn't a corporate entity. It was my father's full legal name. My heart pounded as I pulled up the archive files. For months, I spent every spare night digging through public land records, tax filings, and legal registries. What I discovered made my blood run cold with realization. My father hadn't lost his money. He hadn't gone into debt. Victoria had tried to transfer the deed of the grand family home into her name using a forged power of attorney right before he died. But my father, ever the brilliant architect and planner, had placed the entire property, along with the vast land it sat on, into an irrevocable land trust years before he ever married Victoria. And the sole trustee and ultimate beneficiary of that trust wasn't Victoria. It wasn't Chloe. It was me. Victoria's fake will only covered my father's personal bank accounts, which she had drained, and minor personal possessions. But the actual estate, the massive multi-million-dollar property she lived in, the ground beneath her feet, was legally owned by the trust. And because Victoria had failed to pay the property taxes and ground lease fees for 2 consecutive years, assuming the house was hers free and clear, the trust had officially issued a notice of default and foreclosure. I went to one of the most ruthless property attorneys in the state. I laid down the original land trust documents, my father's real handwritten ledger, and the foreclosure notice. My attorney looked at the paperwork, then looked up at me with a slow, respectful nod. "Clara, this woman has been squatting on your property for 2 years. Technically, she doesn't own a single brick of that house. You can evict her tomorrow morning." "No," I said quietly, a cold certainty settling in my chest. "Not tomorrow, not yet." "Why wait?" he asked. Because she needs to feel what it's like to have the rug pulled from under her feet in front of everyone she cares about, I replied. She spent 10 years humiliating me in public. I want her to understand that every breath she takes in that house is only because I allowed it. For 6 months, I worked quietly behind the scenes. I authorized my attorney to finalize the full transfer of ownership. I quietly bought out the lingering debts on the estate. I secured the final deed of title, signed and stamped by the High Court. By mid-December, I owned the grand house on Elm Street. I owned the land, the guest house, the gardens, and even the high-end furnishings that were tied to the property's historical lease. Victoria was living in my house, spending money she didn't have, planning a lavish Christmas dinner to impress her rich future in-laws, completely unaware that she didn't own the table she was setting. I accepted her fake, last-minute Christmas invitation with a smile. She thought she was inviting me to rub her daughter's rich fiancé in my face. She thought she was bringing me there to act as the poor, quiet stepsister who served as a contrast to Chloe's sparkling perfection. She didn't know I was coming to collect what was mine. The gathering of hypocrites. By 7:00 p.m., the dining room of the mansion was filled with loud, upper-class chatter and the clinking of expensive crystal wine glasses. Victoria was in her absolute element. She floated around the room in a velvet gown, laughing softly at every joke made by Julian's father, Mr. Vance, a powerful local real estate developer. Chloe sat beside Julian, showing off a sparkling diamond ring and talking loudly about their upcoming destination wedding in Europe. "Oh, it's just so wonderful to have the whole family together," Victoria announced loudly, raising her glass so the whole table would pay attention. "Family is everything to me, Mr. Vance. Since my late husband passed, I've worked tirelessly to keep this home a beacon of light and warmth for everyone." Mr. Vance smiled warmly. "You've done an incredible job, Victoria. This property is magnificent. In fact, my firm was looking at the historic zoning in this neighborhood, and a house like this on this much acreage. It's worth millions." "Well," Victoria beamed, fluffing her hair, "it takes a certain touch to maintain a legacy like this. I've sacrificed so much to keep this roof over our heads." I sat at the very end of the long table, the seat furthest from the fire, right next to the drafty door leading to the kitchen. My plate was the only one that hadn't been poured high-end wine. Victoria had instructed the caterer to serve me tap water. Chloe turned her head toward me, a condescending smirk playing on her lips. "Clara, dear, could you pass the bread rolls? Oh, wait, make yourself useful. Could you fetch the extra gravy from the kitchen? The caterer seems slow tonight." Julian let out a small chuckle, looking at me like I was part of the hired staff. "Chloe, let Clara eat her dinner," Mr. Vance's wife said gently, feeling a bit of the awkward tension in the air. "She's a guest too." "Oh, Clara doesn't mind," Victoria cut in smoothly, her tone laced with ice. "Clara knows her place in this house. She's always been. Well, let's just say she's more comfortable behind the scenes. Isn't that right, Clara?" The entire table turned to look at me. 10 pairs of wealthy, judgment-filled eyes were fixed on my simple dress, waiting for me to lower my head, smile weakly, and do what I was told. I looked directly at Victoria. I didn't flinch. I didn't blush. I just looked at her with a calm, steady gaze that made her smile flicker for a split second. "I am very comfortable with my place at this table, Victoria," I said, my voice quiet but completely clear. "More than you know." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't like the tone of my voice. She was used to me flinching, stuttering, or quietly excusing myself to hide in the bathroom. "Well then," Victoria sneered quietly under her breath, so only the near end of the table could hear. "If you're so comfortable, don't just sit there like a bump on a log. Make yourself useful." She stood up from her chair at the head of the table, walked over to the side cabinet, and picked up a heavy, painted ceramic dish. It was a literal dog bowl, a dark blue dish with the word BRUTUS painted on the side in crude black letters. Brutus was the family dog, who had passed away 3 years ago. The room suddenly went dead quiet as Victoria walked over to where I sat. with a slick, cruel grin that she tried to disguise as a joke for the guests. She set the heavy dog bowl down right on top of my fine china plate with a loud, ringing clack. The dog bowl and the grand reveal. The sound of that ceramic bowl hitting my plate echoed through the grand dining room like a gunshot. The entire table went silent. Mr. Vance froze with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. His wife gasped softly, covering her lips with her hand. Chloe let out a muffled giggle, while Julian looked down at his lap, visibly uncomfortable but saying nothing. "Since you insist on sitting with the adults while wearing rags, Clara," Victoria said, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction, "I thought this plate suited your background a bit better. After all, we wouldn't want you dirtying the fine silver your father couldn't afford to leave you." She laughed, a light, musical laugh meant to frame the gesture as a light-hearted family joke. "Oh, don't look so shocked, everyone. It's just an inside joke in our family. Clara knows we love to tease her." She turned her back on me, intending to walk back to the head of the table, expecting me to break down in tears and run out into the snow, just like I used to when I was a teenager. Instead, I picked up a spoon. Slowly, deliberately, I tapped the spoon against the side of my water glass. Tink, tink, tink. The clear, ringing sound cut through the heavy silence of the room. "Victoria," I said. My voice wasn't raised. It wasn't shaking. It was ice cold, carrying an authority that stopped her dead in her tracks. Victoria paused, turning around with a sharp glare. "What is it now, Clara? Don't make a scene in front of our guests." "You handed me a dog bowl," I said softly, looking around the table at the shocked faces of her wealthy friends and her daughter's future in-laws. "You handed me a dog bowl at Christmas dinner to remind me of my place." "It was a joke, Clara. Don't be so dramatic," Chloe snapped, her face turning red with frustration. "You're embarrassing us." "No, Chloe," I replied, standing up slowly from my chair. "I'm not embarrassing you. Your mother is about to embarrass herself." I reached into my wool coat hanging on the back of my chair and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had brought with me. I unsealed the top and pulled out a stack of heavy, court-stamped legal documents. "Victoria," I said, holding up the top document, "you just told Mr. Vance how much sacrifice it took for you to keep a roof over your head in your house." "Put those away right now," Victoria hissed, her voice dropping into an angry, low whisper as she stepped toward me. "Whatever little game you're playing, do not do this here. Leave this house immediately." "I can't leave," I said, smiling faintly. "Because to leave, I would have to be asked to leave by the owner of the property." "I am the owner of this property," Victoria barked, her poise completely shattering as her face turned pale with rage. "This is my house. I took care of your father. I inherited everything. You have nothing." "That's where you're wrong," I said. I walked slowly down the length of the long dining table. With every step, the room grew quieter. I stopped right behind Mr. Vance and handed him a copy of the legal land trust agreement, along with the high court order. "Mr. Vance, you're a real estate developer," I said politely. "Perhaps you'd like to read the official deed title for 412 Elm Street." Mr. Vance, looking stunned, adjusted his reading glasses and took the paper. His eyes scanned the top header, moving quickly down to the seal of the State Land Registry and the judge's signature at the bottom. His eyebrows shot up in utter disbelief. He looked up at Victoria, then back at the paper, then directly at me. This property isn't in your name, Victoria," Mr. Vance said slowly, his voice echoing in the silent room. "This house is owned entirely by the Arthur Estate Land Trust, and the sole owner and trustee listed here is Clara Arthur." Chloe gasped, sitting up straight. "What? That's impossible. Mom, tell him he's wrong." Victoria's face drained of all color. The smug, condescending smile she had worn for 10 years vanished in an instant, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. "That's fake," Victoria shrieked, lunging forward to grab the paper from Mr. Vance's hands. "She forged that. She's lying. I own this house." "You don't, Victoria," I said, pulling out the second document from my envelope, the official writ of possession and notice of eviction. My father knew you tried to alter his will while he was sick. He set up this trust years ago to make sure you couldn't sell or ruin his life's work. And for 2 years, you failed to pay the trust ground lease and taxes. I stepped up to the head of the table, the grand seat where Victoria had sat like a queen for years. I placed my hands on the high back of the carved wooden chair. You handed me a dog bowl at Christmas dinner, I said, looking her dead in the eyes, because you thought I was a parasite begging for scraps at your table. I took a step closer to her, my voice low and unyielding. You had no idea. I own the table. Total justice and the legacy. The silence in the dining room was suffocating. Victoria stood frozen in the middle of the room, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She looked at Mr. Vance, hopping for support, but Mr. Vance was already standing up, setting his napkin down on the table with a cold, disgusted look on his face. Victoria, Mr. Vance said, his voice laced with judgment. Is this true? Have you been living here illegally on her property while treating her like this? No, Julian, honey, tell them, Chloe wailed, turning to her fiancé. It's a mistake. Clara is doing this to ruin my engagement. Julian stood up, looking deeply embarrassed. He looked at Chloe, then at her mother, who was trembling with a mix of fury and terror. Chloe, your family lied to us. You told us you own this entire estate outright. We do, we will fix it, Victoria stammered, stepping toward me with her hands shaking. Clara, sweetie, please, we're family. Let's go into the study and talk about this like reasonable people. We don't need to embarrass each other in front of guests. Family? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. When was I family to you, Victoria? Was it when you moved my dead mother's things into the trash? Was it when you kicked me out with 2 bags of clothes? Or was it 5 minutes ago when you handed me a dog bowl in front of 10 people? Clara, please, Victoria whimpered, her voice cracking as the realization of total ruin finally hit her. You can't do this to us, it's Christmas. I'm not doing anything, Victoria. The state sheriff's department is, I replied calmly. Right on cue, the muffled sound of a vehicle pulling into the snow-covered driveway echoed through the front windows. Red and blue lights flashed softly through the sheer white curtains of the dining room. I gave you 2 years to act like a human being, I said quietly. You spent those 2 years enjoying my father's hard work while mocking his memory. The eviction notice takes effect at midnight tonight. The officers outside are here to ensure that you, Chloe, and your personal items are escorted off my property peacefully. Mr. Vance turned to his wife and son. We're leaving, right now. Julian, wait, please don't go, Chloe cried out, running after him as he walked toward the front door without looking back. The engagement ring she had bragged about all evening seemed entirely meaningless as Julian's family walked out into the cold night, leaving the front door wide open. Victoria collapsed into a dining chair, the very chair she had used to lord over me for a decade. She put her head in her hands and began to sob, stripped of her fake status, her wealth, her social standing, and her dignity. 2 uniformed officers entered the foyer, politely stepping into the dining room. Ms. Clara Arthur, one of them asked. Yes, I said, stepping forward. These individuals have been officially served with an order of eviction. Please ensure they gather their personal clothing and vacate the premises. Within 2 hours, the grand mansion was quiet. The caterers had packed up and left. Chloe and Victoria had thrown their bags into the trunk of a rented sedan, shouting insults at me through their tears until the car doors slammed shut and they drove away into the snowy night. They were forced to move into a tiny 2-bedroom rental on the poor side of town, the exact kind of life Victoria had spent her entire existence running away from. I walked back into the empty, grand dining room. The fireplace crackled softly. The glittering chandelier cast long shadows across the walls. I walked over to the end of the table where I had been seated hours ago. The blue dog bowl still sat on top of the fine china plate. I picked it up, walked out into the cold night air, and threw it into the trash can by the gate. Standing on the porch, looking up at the clear, star-filled Christmas sky, I finally felt a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had protected me. He had allowed Victoria to show her true colors so that when justice finally arrived, it would be absolute, unbreakable, and complete. Life has a funny way of bringing everything full circle. Cruelty, arrogance, and fake pride might build a temporary castle, but truth and patience will always inherit the kingdom in the end. Never lower your head when people try to treat you like nothing, because you never know when the table they're sitting at actually belongs to you. This story is inspired by the real experiences. We believe that every story carries a lesson that can bring light to others. To protect everyone's privacy, our editors may change names, locations, and certain details while keeping the heart of the story true. Thank you for watching this story on Calm Girl Stories. If you enjoyed this story of justice, patience, and triumph, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Calm Girl Stories for more dramatic and emotional stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Clara's shoes? Thank you for watching and stay strong.